in. My name is Melissa Matee Murphy. I am one of the Agriculture and Natural Resources agents with Fulton County Cooperative Extension. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you're unfamiliar with Cooperative Extension, we are a collaborative effort between local county governments and the state land grant institutions. In the case of Georgia, that is the University of Georgia, where we work together to bring you programming like this. It used to be at county facilities, and now it's basically in your own home. Thanks to COVID, we do a lot of webinars and a lot of digital programming now. So thank you so much for signing up for our program. We have a lot more of these to come over the summer. I know everybody is very plant-minded right now, and we got a lot of great feedback from other programs about, thank you for all these great recommendations, but I'm on a budget. So how am I supposed to do all this? And that is why we have Dr. Pennisi here tonight. So Dr. Bodie Pennisi is an extension horticulturist with University of Georgia. She is based out of Griffin, Georgia, so very centrally located, and she has a wealth of knowledge about these sorts of things. So again, please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and we will address all questions at the end. So Dr. Pennisi.
Thank you, Melissa, and good evening, everyone. This morning when Melissa sent me an email reminding me, I was like, oops, I totally forgot that I had booked myself for tonight. So I had to call my husband and tell him that I will not be coming home for dinner, but instead I will be spending fun time talking to you guys about landscapes and how we can put gorgeous plants and make your landscape really joyful to be without breaking the bank. So hopefully I'll do this topic a credit and you'll learn something in the next hour. If you have any questions, again, put those in the chat box. I'll try to address them at the end. If I don't answer all of your questions, I'll try to do so in the best possible way through Melissa later on. But just don't be afraid to come up with any questions you can think of, because that's how we both learn from each other. I still learn a lot from people telling me, hey, I planted this plant, but it didn't grow, or I planted this one and it did great. And so that teaches me quite a bit as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So the topic is how we can get this kind of landscape without paying for it. This landscape is clearly brand new, and it has been freshly installed, and it is clearly in a very, very nice area, overlooking a lake, or that's a lake, not a pond, looks like. And the house is complemented by this really nice, very naturalistic landscape. But one thing that we don't really see is that this kind of landscape would easily break the bank. It will be something close to about 80,000 to even 150,000, depending where you are. So and we don't really know what they did in the front of the house, but that's a lot of money to spend on a landscape. And of course, a brand new landscape and depends on so many things, like the slope, where you're going to put in hardscapes, installed irrigation, the size of plants that you're going to put in. So a lot of these I'm not really going to go ahead and be having time to talk about today, but what I would like to share is some really good and practical tips on how we can make our landscapes and our homes look very warm and inviting and well cared for. And I guarantee you're going to look at your landscape completely differently. So, okay, this is clearly not what our homes would look like, or we would like to look like. There is certain beauty to this landscape, if you can call it a landscape, but it's a very naturalistic looking house. We're not going to be doing this. But what we'd like to do is look at some practical tips, and those I'm going to show you some examples of each of these. So just kind of like pay attention as we go through to each of these topics, so you can notice what I'm pointing out to. We are going to look at things like edging the sidewalks and the beds to delineate shapes and clearly make things separate from one another and being able to tell them apart. We're going to talk in more details about pruning and rejuvenating shrubs. And I know that pruning is a topic all on its own that could take several hours. I teach a whole day workshop, used to, that is before COVID, and we would spend an entire day just about looking at pruning, and we still would just barely scratch the surface. But we would like to talk about some of those really quick and easy things to do, especially with things like existing shrubs, to take them into new forms, especially older plants plants that have been there a long time and you're just like, this thing is overgrowing the space, what can I do with it? We want to utilize existing mature plants. Those can be split and separated and moved around in your yard. We can talk about interplanting with bulbs and ground covers, meaning like you can do something that grows well one season, such as the bulbs, before the deciduous foliage of the trees emerges. And then as the summer comes closer and the bulb foliage kind of goes away, you have summer flowers popping up, and those would be really, really well. So those would be interplanted, so you're enjoying color for extended seasons. We want to talk about adding new complementary plants. Those are plants that would create focal elements in the landscape, so you could look at something that is new and still enjoy it as a fabric of your landscape. We want to talk about incorporating a new fence, walk, pergola, or trellis, or all three. We want to talk about adding retention walls and especially raised beds and how quickly that can really, really make a difference in how you perceive your landscape. We're going to talk about adding compost and mulch. And lastly, we're going to chat a little bit about adding planters. So I'm going to try to touch on each one of these topics. And some of those topics I'll have more information than others because they have more information to add to, especially the pruning. And for some of the others, I'll just show you some pictures. So here it is, this delineating the spaces and creating clear, defined spaces in your landscape. Look at how clearly you can tell where the herbaceous flowers are and the grasses compared to the lawn. And notice that not everything is in a sharp line, but there is a curvy wave to this. This is a very useful trick that landscape architects use a lot, that creates a lot more of a like relaxed look to your landscape. And it's very appealing, and it's no more harder to do than your straight lines, but it definitely can add more to your landscape. Well, this one clearly is one where we're going to see that it is definitely a time to prune when you have quite a few large plants. And this is a common to almost every single house that I have lived in or have seen other people move in. And then, you know, in 10, 15 years, the landscape that was small at the beginning of the house when it was built, all of a sudden is turning to be as massive as this shrub on the right-hand side of this picture. And we all can see some that are even leaning. Like, for example, this one right here. This is so close to the eaves of this house, and the plant is having to fight with the space. Again, nothing wrong with the plant, nothing wrong with the people that put those things. It's like we always tend to underestimate how large those plants are going to be. And a lot of times we are restricted in the spaces that we can put those plants, and we just simply run into the same problem. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can fight this. So here is a picture of before and after landscapes and how they were pruned. These were two pictures of the same house, and just simply with a little bit of judicious pruning, how you can spruce up that house look and make it a lot more appealing and a lot more maintained. And again, these are simple enough to do and do not have to be done by shearing, which is a common practice that a lot of people use for some of those shrubs. But that's one practice that tends to create more problems than it actually solves. So we'll talk about some of these. Then there is another picture here, one after another, two ones that again, they were shared with me by a landscaper who is very successful in operating in the Atlanta area. I can dig up his name, but he shared those pictures with me quite a few years back, as you could tell. But that's something that he did, and you could tell that this was a very carefully cleaned up Japan holly that has been put back in a shape that will allow it to grow over time and reach, you know, its size again after several years. But you could see that there is a pruning job done, and clearly, if your feet have to leave the ground, the best thing to do is to actually hire someone to do the pruning for you. But just with some small changes like this, it can look at a lot cleaner and nicer look. We're going to utilize existing and mature plants. This happened to be pictures from my house on the left, where I lived in Stockbridge. I'm sorry, in Jonesboro, Clayton County. Now I live in Henry County in Stockbridge. And this used to be a large bed that had, a lot of herbaceous material there. We had some Secretia, which is that purple heart that you see here, some Coleus, some Lantanas, some Impatiens, a big Salvia there too, Agapanthus. And what I'll do is, these plants were getting bigger and bigger, and I could easily take some of that purple heart and move it somewhere else, but still retain that particular plant if I didn't want to get rid of it altogether. This picture was taken in my mother-in-law's yard in Gainesville, Florida, and that is a Asiatic Jasmine. That's a variegated form that is spreading very nicely as an evergreen ground cover. And easily that plant can be taken and planted somewhere else, especially in like shaded areas. And there's a canna here that just to show you what plant this happens to be on a Athens campus at UGA, at the Trial Gardens. And cannas could be easily split and moved apart. They tend to be a little more aggressive, and many people do not want to see the old varieties, come and be used a whole lot. They tend to be a little more aggressive. Some of the new ones are a lot smaller, but they are not allowed to be propagated. So that's one thing that I want you to kind of bear in the back of your mind. If the plant is patented, it's unlawful to split or do any kind of propagation on these plants. If it's an older one, older than 17 years, chances are that the patent has expired, and then you are allowed to propagate those plants. Here's an example from my neighborhood. Here is a very knowledgeable master gardener, and she took in some bearded iris from her yard, and she just then split it and put it in this area. And it was this lawn is next to this, her lawn is next to the common area, the common road passes here. And so everybody could see how this was like 5 years ago. Now they're all blooming very, very nicely. So a lot of plant material that she generated, but she very, very carefully didn't put it in only one single line, but put like 2, 3, 4 lines of this, and kind of naturally made it so that the center part is really nice and thick, and then it kind of like gets a little bit tailed toward the edges. But very, very nice job there. And again, she just used what she had in her yard. Double planting is again, I mentioned that with bulbs, but you can also do it with things like spring color, like snapdragons and sweet williams here that you can see in this picture. And then you may not be noticing, but this here is lantana. And so later on in the year, when things have kind of snapdragons and sweet williams have passed on in their cycle, we're moving on to hot lantanas. This happens to be my daughter's primrose or daycare that she used to go to. So the kids would stop and look at the butterflies that would come to these plants. So it was a really, really nice thing that they did. So double planting gives you 2 colors that are extending the season from spring way into the fall. I mentioned incorporating a new walk. So that walk is something that you can make in your landscape if you have a larger area in your backyard where things just don't seem to be growing that well, or you want to be getting through some areas. That immediately breaks apart the landscape and makes it so that it looks bigger, but it also looks better maintained, and there's more of a purpose, like a garden with you're walking. And you notice here that again, that walk was set out not in straight lines, but again, there is that feeling of like wavy lines, and the beds have that look to them as well. So that's an easy thing to, relatively easy to do, not a whole lot. And depending on what kind of surface you put in, it could be something as Christmas tree that has been chipped off, chipped into smaller parts, or some mulch, or if you want to do something a little bit more permanent, some kind of rock mulch. Creating a raised bed is certainly something that has been shown to immediately elevate the look in the landscape and make the plants that are in those beds more visible, especially if the plants that are going in there are larger. And so you can see here that this bed, previously either there was no bed next to the house, or the bed was like down, Oh, and what they did is they built that nice kind of get a curved area, elevated to about, a foot, maybe 20 inches high. And then they filled it with soil and compost, and they put in some plants that are right now, they're newly planted, but within 3 years, this is going to come right up to this area. It's going to be very, very beautiful. So a raised bed would be far better than if these plants were put right in the ground, because it would take them so much longer. And it's much healthier for the plants to be elevated. That improves immediately the drainage. So that's what a raised bed does. Think about vegetable gardens. Same principles apply to ornamental plants as well. And you don't have to use the expensive bricks or anything that is going to cost you a lot more money. You can use wood, you can use railroad ties, you can use anything that is going to allow you to build that bed and separate it. I think I have a couple of other pictures to show you on this. Adding planters, again, it doesn't have to be something as expensive and large as this planter. I don't even know if there is a plant that is going to be as expensive as that planter, which is like almost like $80, $100. It's a large planter, but it can be something smaller, and you can even be creative with some of the stuff that is coming from your own yard, and decide to build a raised bed, pretty large raised bed like the people did up in the top picture. Or you can cut if you're removing a stump of a large tree, they'll remove the stump, but just leave it there. Just a hollow area in the center is almost always present there. And you can use this space as an elevated planter. So again, this is just a simple idea. All right, let's take a look at some impact ideas that have been put in place. Creating separate spaces, adding paths and few outdoor walls, what we call is made either from living a dense planting of trees and shrubs, or even some things like living screens. And we'll show you some in a second here. But it's easily, people say, I don't want to see my neighbor. My husband is a good example of that. He's like, I don't care to see the neighbor. So please keep my screen of shrubs there. And a lot of times those, they're valid questions. You may not be really wanting to see the neighbor or the house, maybe for noise reduction, or maybe some other reasons. But you have to also think about how long is this going to, do you want to see it evergreen? Do you mind it if the leaves drop and it's a deciduous plant? But you also have to think about how big is it going to have, how much space is in between. So that's a fig tree that has certainly gotten to be a little bit too big, but it does separate the spaces in between. And you can use this kind of idea to separate spaces inside your garden. If you have a larger area, that's clearly something that these plants, those shrubs, are doing. Again, they're lining walls, they're separating spaces. Some of them may be higher, maybe 2 feet tall, or 4 feet, or even 5 feet and above. It all depends on what you have to work with, and of course the budget. You could do that by moving some of your existing large plants around. People don't usually think that this is something that they want to do or that they could do, but you could easily do that with quite a few of the shrubs, and you can move them around. And as long as you water them well during establishment, you should have no trouble with these plants, and if they're placed in the right environment. Again, evergreens make for year-round privacy, but they will take time to fill in. Most of those are a little bit more slow growing than the deciduous plants. Here are some examples of plants that you could use. A lot of the Laurel Petalums, again, most of us have moved away from the large Laurel Petalums that used to get like, 10 feet high and about 15 feet wide. But those plants are still out there, and they're almost, immortal. They're there to stay. So if we have some of those, or we can obtain some from people that don't mind having them dug up from their yards or spaces that they have, you can easily cut those down to stubs. I mean, literally stub of wood, and move that into another area. Water really good for about a month, and that plant will start growing quite well. So I have done that with the large Laurel Petalums. The new Laurel Petalums, the dwarf ones, you can't do that with them, but you won't really use those anyway. They're quite expensive, and they're much slower growing. This is a picture of Calicarpa, or American beautyberry. It's a great native plant that can be used in full sun to quite a bit of shade. And again, it can be used to attract pollinators, lots of butterflies and bees. And it has a year-round interest, because after the white bloom fades, turns into purple berries, the leaves fall off, the berries are going to stay on the plant after. So throughout the winter, you have something to look at. So it's really, really great plants for that. Here is a living screen to improving scenery. So you're looking here at some plants that have been placed specifically and purposefully to screen from existing areas. Those are, you know, something that you need to keep in mind is the placement of these living screens. So a lot of time people would put those in a one single line spaced very close together. Very quickly, these will have a problem growing into one another. And then if one all of a sudden dies, you're going to have a hole. So it's much better if you stagger the plants like this. So you're always having some kind of a protection in the view. So there's a placement of the house, whether you have it in front of the house or the side or both ways. This is the best placement of the living screens. Hiding the unattractive, quite a few of us would have like utility boxes, and sometimes you can cover only from one side. The utility companies will say, make sure that we have access to it. And a lot of times people put something that is getting quite large, so they're being made to remove something large. But the idea is to have something in place that will not get too big, that would be somewhat contained, preferably easy enough so we don't have to do too much maintenance, but we can hide some things that are unattractive. This happens to be a very unattractive dumpster. And in Athens, they have placed this gorgeous Thunbergia, which is an annual vine and grows really, really rapidly. But you can screen or camouflage what you don't want to see. It could be compost pile or air conditioning unit. Again, make sure that you have access at least on one side to that area. You can use a small tree or shrub. Trellis and fence will cost you a little bit more, but they'll allow you to put something that is climbing and or needs the support, and then you can maintain it easier than a shrub. And things like morning glories, honeysuckles, rambling roses could easily be trained to those locations. Here's an example on the left from my brother-in-law's yard, and he is a great gardener. I have learned a lot from him, and he's had put some snow peas right there, and he's using that both to get the seed pod, but also to scream from the very, very loud dog he told me that used to live next door. So again, that's double usage of the space in the plant. This is in Henry County at a heritage house. The master gardeners there built this, and they also planted these roses, and now they're like completely large. This was like probably 8 years ago. But the box, the utility box is right here, and there's clearly access all around it. You can walk around it. So no problem there. And this did not cost them a whole lot to build and made it very, very nice. So easy enough to do. Dressing the tree beds is something that we could do to, I get a lot of questions, people tell me, what can I plant under dense shade? They're not quite as few plants that grow well under deep shade, but we definitely have some options. We can replant the tree beds with ground covers that tolerate shade and competition. And here is an example of one plant I use in my yard. This is a Japanese Pachysandra. Loves to be in deep shade, cannot take any sun of any kind, likes to be on the dry side, so a slope is ideal for it. It does not like wet feet and establishes quite well. But there's a native Pachysandra as well. So Allegany spurge is the name. This is Japanese spurge, and this one is evergreen. The native one is less so of an evergreen, but it's also a great, great plant. So there are other choices, and I just listed some a few here. There is the Variated Solomon seal, which is this one I have in my yard. This plant is a very, very attractive one. It grows slowly, but it spreads by rhizomes, and it kind of establishes a colony. You can put it in deep shade, and you can put it in partial shade, and if it gets morning sun, if it's watered well, that's fine too. But it does have these little white blooms that come up, and they're about a month ago, probably less than a month ago, I had those blooming in my yard. There are some native species that are much larger. So again, these are easy enough to grow, and I haven't seen anything eating their foliage. So certain plants are really, really tough. And a Japanese Pachysandra is one of those. This is Saxifragi, or strawberry geraniums, we call it. Easy enough to grow. This is a system that I saw the idea from the University of Florida, my alma mater, and I thought that would be something useful to share with our own people in Georgia. And that is a place where you could grow in a tough environment where you just don't nothing else grows well. Either that, or you are swapping plants very often. So instead of you having to grow the plant in that native soil, what you do is you dig a hole and you put in a large enough pot. A 1-gallon container is ideal, and then you just put the pot in there. The plant will dry out faster, but you're not going to have so many issues. And if something is not doing well, you just swap it with another one. So I thought that would be something quick for color, that you don't have to rely on the growing part so much. Widening the foundation beds, something that people just don't realize is you could extend your beds to make them more bigger and accommodate larger plants. So most of our foundation beds are typically about 3 to 4 feet wide, which very quickly becomes small for some of the larger plants. And that leads to cramped planting and or a lot of unnecessary pruning. You're fighting with a plant that wants to grow bigger than the space allows it. So just add some more space. Again, make sure that this is not the line that you use. Just lining, straight lines are not ideal. If this was extended and more like a wavy line, that could have been so much more attractive. And you could put in some annual color around there, so you actually make it even more colorful. So again, really not that difficult to do. Lessening the lawn. This is not something that I say very freely in front of my colleagues from the turf science. Dr. Clint Waltz would not be happy if he hears me say this, but I would say it: lessen the lawn and put some more flowers in. So we always think about ways to make sure that there's something more interesting in the landscape. And to me, a lawn has certain uses. Of course, run with the kids, run with the pets, just a little to stretch your legs, but I like to look at my blooms and my flowers, so it's a little bit more interesting. But we can make it so that you still have everything in there with just a little bit more space for those new plants that you may want to move around from another side of your garden to a new place. So anchor those new beds. If you're starting with new beds, with some tall shrubs, those are used, we call this backbones, and then fill in the rest with some more compact flowering shrubs, lower evergreens, perennials, annuals, and ground covers. And that is the space that will immediately make it so that your landscape looks like new, even though all you've done is you've used the same space, you just redesigned it. It's kind of like moving furniture around and put in a couple of new rugs and some, couple of new pieces, small pieces in your living room. Edging the beds, this is a very time-honored tradition of, again, making crisp lines using a power edger or flat bladed spade to cut a sharp edge around the beds. Again, there are good tools for that. It will give you a little bit more work, but you can do it yourself. The next thing you have to do is make sure that these are edged, and that is that there is more, you prevent that grass from creeping as much as possible. And this is photo courtesy of my colleague, Dr. Gary Backman from MSU. And he told me that he actually had those bottles emptied himself, and he was very proud of his achievement. And I thought that that was actually a very good use of these bottles. So get creative with that. You can use anything you can think of. I have seen even plates, broken plates, old plates that have been used there. But you can also use plants for a little bit of that edge look. That also will help you with creating that new space. So this is some, this is just a picture in Atlanta I took several years ago. And of course there is this, pathway here, but also there is a lining of boxwood that really makes it so nice and crisp edge. It elevates that side. So you're not really looking just a flat space here, but there is a clear walk, and there's a area that could use some of those colors that we can add to it. Adding fresh mulch is always a great idea. Mulch degrades really quickly in our climates, and especially something like the cheap mulch that most of us use, like pine straw. This is my neighbor's yard, and I peeked right around when they were putting their stuff. So again, edged beds, widened beds, and the pine straw that gets to be put in at least once a year. But if you do something that yard trimmings, which are available in places for free, you could certainly get them delivered, or you go and get them yourself, and it will not cost you much, just your labor and the gas to go get it. But that is a very good. I use that in my research for my trials. I actually use yard trimmings. I don't spend money on mulch. But again, it's something that you could easily get access to. All right, what to do with the shrubs? Shrubs, they need to be rejuvenated. If they get too large, we need to reduce their size or maintain them. Many shrubs actually require pruning to improve their flowering. And if we need to change the shape, we can see some creative pruning. Are you going to be comfortable doing pruning to your shrubs right away? Maybe, maybe not. But I guarantee you that once you start pruning and you watch carefully the growth that results from it, you'll gain more experience and more knowledge, and you'll feel more comfortable with doing some more drastic type of pruning. Not every place, every yard can have the luxury of completely open space around each shrub. That's how you'll see the final natural shape of a shrub. This picture was taken in our garden here in Griffin, and you can see that viburnum is growing unimpeded with anything else on the sides. So that is a very, very nice shape of the shrub. Most of the time when people grow those, you put something right here, something right there, and the shape of the shrub will be completely different. And so just be aware that the space that a plant is allowed to grow into is going to be very, very impactful to the final change, shape of that shrub. This is a common problem. Again, I used to go around, take pictures in my neighborhood of all sorts of problems that people were experiencing with their plants. Here is a improper, what we call skeletizing, and this is how you reduce the size of the shrub. Well, you can see that there is a problem here. That plant has been quite well pruned, but hasn't been pruned enough. And clearly, I guarantee you that it has not, as the next picture will show you. That was later that same season. In other words, between this previous picture, you could see that he did not take back further back enough so that the next year he didn't have to worry about doing this over and over and over again. The plant will rejuvenate very, very quickly. We are dealing with hollies, and hollies respond quite well to this. Proper skeletizing on things that are much larger and you need to really do severe reduction in their size are taken down to what we call bare wood and larger pieces. So this one was a Viburnum cinnamonium, which is a species of viburnum that is not native, but we have this large plant on the Griffin campus, and this is how they literally took it down to where they kept the general shape the same, but this plant was about maybe about 40% bigger all around, and so they came in and they pruned it. It could have been even pruned a little bit better here with some of those being reduced, but they did their best. And honestly, this plant is doing just fine now. In fact, it's needing more pruning. That was done probably about 10 years ago. This is again another plant that has been skeletonized properly. And again, when you're reducing it, you're keeping that Christmas look, Christmas tree shape, where the lowest branches are widest, and as you get a little bit closer to the top, you reduce the amount of wood that is left to just a few little points and a clear single point. That keeps the shape, the general shape of the shrub. Sometimes we need to reduce the entire plant down. So these were some pictures and some renewal pruning that was done on the Griffin campus some years ago. These were Yaupon hollies, dwarf Yaupon hollies that were quite large. They were getting to be about 4 feet tall and quite a bit wide. They were literally chopped down. I mean, there was no pretty pruning here. There was just like take them all down to where you just have like even sheared some of the wood around. This was done in March, and this was the picture in July. So clearly that plant can recover, and that was about 6 years ago. Now these plants are exactly back to where they were. Same landscape, same time. These were large Laurel Petalums. Later in the year, you could see how much more colorful the foliage is. These plants now are about yay tall, so about 6 feet tall. So they need to be pruned again. Ideally, these would not be kept here. We would move some of those out, dig them out, and reduce that space that is really, really for 1 or 2 plants, but that's again a little bit too much work to do. Topiary shaping is an option for older plants. It may require, I don't know, maybe somebody looking at the plant and saying, you know what, I can learn to live with this. Maybe it's not what I would think of, but at least I got to keep my shrub, and that shrub is still looking pretty good. So something like poof, 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 poof balls here that have been cut away to expose some of the largest branches of this plant and left with some top greenery. This one was a cemetery. I thought that was actually pretty nicely done. Same principle as pruning of juniper, that is removing the lowermost branches and opening up this space so that it's called like a lifting the canopy. So it's higher up. And there is a picture from Schlotzky's in Hapeville, and right behind it there was very little space for these large shrubs, and they elevated that canopy to where now these plants look completely different, and there is a little bit of quite a bit of clearance next to them. So just giving you an idea that you don't have to dig up an old plant, you can change its look and it could be quite appealing. So there is a plant that was again Yopon holly, native one that has been left wild, grow as big as it can in Griffin, at the UGA Griffin campus. And later on we came in and we cleaned it up. That is, we lifted its canopy and so that we can allow a little bit more space all around it. They planted some perennials around it. So cleaning this from previous shape that looked kind of unruly all over the place to where now that it's looking quite a bit better. This is taking a shrub to a tree. This is a landscaper who's working with a probably about 3-year-old crepe myrtle that has been established in this area but has never been pruned. And this is taking it from a shrub form to a tree form. And the way you do it is you go around and you look at selecting 5 to 6, 7 branches that are outwardly facing. And if you can find some that are evenly spaced around about equal diameter, that'll be good. Try to keep the center of the plant kind of like free of branches, because the crepe myrtles will try to cross its branches very easily. Clean them up all the way to about the height that you want the canopy to start leafing out and the leaves to come out and the blooms. And all of a sudden you now converted this shrub to this young tree, and it will be tree form from there on. So let's take a look at some common problems and some plant solutions that all of us have experienced, maybe not all at the same time, but we certainly can find some examples. Too much sun and or no irrigation, shaded areas by building or trees, low spots, you have drainage problems in those areas, sloped areas in general, wildlife incursions, and just plain neglect. So I like this one because it shows you how you can take a ditch, maybe not very appealing, and you can cover some of those, move some of those rocks around, some of those stones, maybe bring in some new ones and cover them with some moss. I guarantee you there is some moss that is growing native, some ferns that are just naturally growing in the area. You can just cover some of those and the moss will start growing. You can plant some iris and all of a sudden you start looking at something that looks like a natural vegetation there. East-facing house foundations are typified by morning sun and afternoon shade. So ideal plants that would help with these areas would be some examples: azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, boxwood, holly, hydrangea, fothergilla, Virginia sweetspire. This is Virginia sweetspire that just finished blooming. In some areas, this turns brilliantly red if it's garnet's red foliage. There's a cultivar that is very, very nice, and this is the bloom, and it has this foliage. Again, it goes in full sun and full shade. It's a suckering plant, and give it space and step back, it will really, really do well on its own. This is fothergilla, and again, that's a spring blooming plant. You can tell by the blooms coming in before the foliage, and this is one of our native hydrangeas that are growing really nicely as a colony again on our campus. And this is a toad lily, which is a perennial, non-native perennial, but this is from my yard and my landscape. And that plant just kind of kept on slowly growing and establishing itself. It blooms in October when almost everything else has finished blooming. So it's a very, very nice full shade type of plant that you can use. West and south facing house foundations experience some of the toughest conditions because they have hot afternoon sun. For some of these, we are going to be looking at something that has tolerance to drought and heat at the same time. So junipers, shrub roses, caryopteris, pyreas, crepe myrtles, nine bark, which is a native plant, and some viburnums. There's some rug junipers, something slow growing. This is actually from the perennial side. You can look at St. John's wort. You can look at red hot poker. And this is thyme that has been starting to grow here and done a really, really good job. So personally, I love something that is going to feed the pollinators, and all of these flowering plants are going to feed the pollinators. So you'll see lots of bees and butterflies and all that good stuff. North facing house foundations will experience little or no direct sun. It's going to be cooler there, and it's kind of place that it's challenging for a lot of plants, but you can grow boxwood, sarcocca, which is box shrub, azalea rhododendron, Japanese plum yew is really good for that. Inkberry holly loves that moist kind of shaded conditions. The smooth hydrangea again, summer sweet, arrowwood viburnum. This is what I had. This is a picture from my yard. That's exactly where I have it. Winter hazel is another small shrub. The perennial side, you have foam flowers, foamy bells, lenten rose. This is from my yard again, and some Solomon seals right here. This is some heuchera or foamy bells, not from my yard, another person's yard, but so those would be good to show you. What areas near the base of a slope or near downspouts, this is where you're going to pop in things that really love to be in moist areas almost continually, most with occasional dryness. If they're sunny and wet, river birch, bold cypress, make sure your river birch is away from the from an area where it can get into your basement, because river birch has very, very aggressive roots. But bold cypress is another great plant, a native plant. Just again, big tree, move it away so that it has the time to grow, and you're gonna be really, really enjoying that plant. Inkberry holly on the shrub side, more willows, winterberry holly, Virginia sweet spire. Summer sweet is what you're seeing right here, which is a plant that has very, very sweet kind of fragrance to it, and it's hugely attractive to pollinators. Again, colony forming. Joe Pye weed, which you see right here, swamp milkweed, Siberian iris. These do tend to like quite a bit of those conditions. I'm not even going to go into everything that we can do to prevent, if there is such thing as preventing wildlife incursions, but there is some evidence to show that if we are planting things with pungent aromas, such as lantanas, catmint, chives, mint, sage, the deer and rabbits and things that munch on the foliage are going to stay away from that. But again, I am yet to see something that is completely deer resistant, because deer, if they're thirsty and hungry enough, they'll go after anything. But generally something that if you're experiencing a really tough problem, you have lots of sun, these plants would do well for you. But also think about some cacti and things with rough leaves, thorns and things, take plants with bitter taste, that could really, really help you with this. And there's some ideas, tough succulents. You can see some agaves here. These plants, these pictures were taken from in Alpharetta, from a really, really nice place, Sal's Nursery, where they grow a lot of these plants. And these agaves, century plants, you can see yuccas here. I have some of these in my yard, and they've been going very, very strong for years now. But some spectacular, really tough plants, like put it in there and step back. It is really, really slow growing and very, very tough. Okay, what if you have very large spaces like this yard in our neighborhood, just brand new house, they just put in the sod and maybe a couple of trees, and then what else? Nothing else. Well, quickest and easiest thing to do is to put in some large plants that grow very, very quickly. So I call this the tropical solutions: elephant ears, bananas, cannas, things that have very, very large impact, that love the heat. And depending on the conditions that you have, full sun for all of these, but a lot of the elephant ears will grow in some of the shady conditions as well. So think about something that has very large leaves, that grows quickly, and that could very, very rapidly fill the space there. Um, if you're having a space that you need to put in some ground covers, you can look at the speed that a plant grows, and it may look like, well, yeah, that's kind of easy, but just think about the fact that some plants grow faster than others. And, sometimes we want something to grow really, really fast at first, so they fills up the space and we can enjoy it right away. But at the same time, that growth is not going to stop when it reaches the size that we want it to reach. They want to grow beyond that. So that aggressive growth is going to stay there. So just bear that in mind, that if you are putting something like perennial plumbago or creeping raspberry or Confederate jasmine or lily turf, you're going to have that aggressive growth there for a long time. But if you kind of like bear that in mind and you manage that plant later on, you can grow those successfully and fill up the space. I particularly love the creeping raspberry, which turns burgundy in the winter. It's great for sloped areas that need to be covered with something tough. And if it's dry, this plant is going to grow a lot less. So again, this is one of the best plants for these areas. But fast growing vines from seed are another solution that you could quickly cover something that, say, you want to screen or provide some quick growing something over. Morning glories, quite a few of those, but there is also purple bean vine, which is lab vine, or Jefferson vine is another name for it. This can grow very, very beautifully and climb up quite high. Cypress vines, these are great for hummingbirds, but they do tend to be a little bit weedy. So once you have those, they tend to stay away because they throw lots and lots of seeds. So just bear in mind that some things are a little bit more seedy than others. Black-eyed Susan vine, right here, and sky blue vine, Thunbergia, which is a tropical vine. Again, gorgeous, gorgeous blooms. And you notice here that it's being trained on a chicken wire, because some vines don't have the tendrils to attach, and other vines have those tendrils. So you just need to make sure you know which vine you're dealing with so that you provide the right conditions for them. Other popular native vines, you can have Campsis, which is a trumpet creeper, which is very aggressive vine, but we could see a lot of it. But it's a native vine and it can really, really do a spectacular job with these gorgeous blooms. I personally love to see Parthenocissus, which is the Virginia creeper, and you're like, really? I mean, that plant grows everywhere, but it does have a very, very nice foliage and it's a native plant. So again, if you're really looking for something quick to establish, there's some solutions that we can look at. I love passion flower, maypop. It's also a host plant for the Gulf fritillary butterfly. Some people don't like to see it. It's naturally popping everywhere. Sometimes it can be a little aggressive, but so is Carolina jessamine, another native plant. If you're really concerned about aggressiveness of the plant, coral honeysuckle is far less aggressive, and it does grow its quite well in our conditions. I really like Virgin's Bower clematis, which is a native vine, but again can be aggressive. So the one that people tend to discard is the wisteria. Again, I'm not proposing you go out there and you plant Japanese or Chinese wisteria, which is everywhere, but there are cultivars like Amethyst Falls, which is a native one. We have a native wisteria here, and that one is a lot less aggressive, and it's a really, really good cultivar to look for. What to do with small spaces? These are pictures that can show you that you could definitely go with containers. And I certainly did this a lot when I first moved in our house, and that's all the space I had in the front of my yard. So I kept pushing all sorts of things there. I mean, I got my mint, and I got my rosemary, and I had lantanas, and I had parsley, and a strawberry pot, and I got succulents. I mean, you name it, I had it there. But this bears no resemblance to what I grow right now there. But again, small spaces are definitely something that we can contain in a pot, so container, or we can battle with some plants there if we choose to, like I did with all of these plants have been replaced now. And I certainly spent a lot of time digging up that mint from that space. It's one of those that I regret. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope I left enough time for you to ask me questions. Melissa, you should be proud of me. Didn't I say 50 minutes? And it's almost 50 minutes on the dot.
It's perfect with 2 minutes to spare. Perfect timing. So
All right.
actually been kind of quiet because I think people are furiously taking notes. So do remember this is being recorded and will be sent out to y'all. But now we are gonna open up the chat to any questions. And if we don't get any questions in the chat, then I'll let y'all unmute yourselves because sometimes the chat is kind of hard to do. So what questions does everybody have? When you move into a house, how do you know if a plant is patented?
That's a really, really good question. How do you know that the plant is patented? If by any chance there is a way to ask that question when you first purchase the house from the people before that sold you the house, that would be one place to go to and find if they kept information. They could tell you when they bought it. And if they can tell you what it is, you can maybe send the photo. Melissa can help you with that. But you could also do some search online to find out what the plant name is. And then there is a place you can go to check if the plant is patented. And this is the United States Patent Office. And it's just Google it. And all you have to do is just go through there, find out first what the plant is, what does it look like, and it say like it's a daylily. So a daylily, what kind of color of daylily it is. You can look for some of these in the patent. It's not going to be easy to find these if you have very limited information, but again, try to limit the amount of to have more information before you go to that website and try to search what the plant is. The tag is sometimes being kept. A lot of people keep their tags just for their own purposes. But if you leave the tag in the pot or in the soil, the tag just disappears, breaks apart, and so forth, unless it's kind of covered. I started keeping my tags in a little box in the shed, just keeping them in there. And as soon as I get them, I keep them. But the tag will tell you if the plant is patented. All the new tags, recent, probably about 10 years ago, they started putting PP number that says plant patent number, or PPAF, which means plant patent applied for. Either one of these, if the plant tag tells you that this has those two, that means that the plant has been patented and you have no right to propagate it. Great question. All right.
Is there
mulching near the?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just reading I was reading the questions for you. I'm sorry. You can take it if you want.
Yeah, I popped them in, so I'm looking at them.
Okay.
And Jane is asking me, does mulching near the home structure attract termites? That's a really, really good question. It is definitely something that I've had conversations with Dan Suter, who is our termite guy. And I would say absolutely keep mulching at least a foot, if not 2 feet away from the foundations of your house, especially if there is an area where you can actually see any kind of wood that is exposed. So yes, that's certainly something that I've started working with landscapers, because I work with a commercial clientele, and we are trying to come up with ways to minimize the wood that we allow close to the house. So that's a really, really good point. And thank you, Jane, for bringing it up. Lauren, is there any way to get the look of boulders without the expense? Oh, God, that's a wonderful question. I hadn't even thought about that. Well, I know that there are artificial boulders that can hide some of the smaller, like utility boxes, or like some kind of water features that you need to get access to for the irrigation system. But I also know that they make larger plastic ones that look like boulders for some of the larger utility boxes. So it's probably not going to cost you as much as a boulder. How can you make something papier-mâché with plastic? I don't know, resin. It's a great question. So that's really, really good. But that's the only thing I can come up with. If you have a better idea, hey, please feel to share. Jane, we recently had stumps ground in the backyard and wanted to use the mulch around the home. Would mulching too close to the home structure attract termites? Again, that's kind of related to what we talked about. So stay away 2 feet away from the foundations, and that should be good. But again, having your termites inspections regularly, and we have pest control coming out every so often, inspecting the foundations, inspecting the size of the house, spraying. I guess I just don't like any kind of risk to the foundations of my house. So yes. Uh, Randy, we have an area that has a lot of roots from trees and nothing else is growing there. It is shady. What would the best way to landscape that area? We live in the woods with lots of deer. Ooh, yeah, Randy, that's a really, really excellent question. I would say instead of trying to landscape the entire area, try to come up with certain smaller areas that you can start with and kind of focus the attention there. You may want to look at things like I showed you some of the uh, Japanese Pachysandra does not have deeper root system. If it's an area that is dry, the roots from the trees are going to keep the area kind of dry. So Japanese Pachysandra could be good in that area. I have also used in in spots, I would dig up a space and I would plant, and so allow the plant to just kind of like take care of itself and grow in that area. It may not establish a very strong colony, but it would sort of kind of like grow in that area and give me the look that I'm trying to find, of kind of like greenery underneath or some color. You can put some bulbs if it's a deciduous area. You can put in some bulbs in some of the edges to where it's like you know that you're going to get some spring sun, and you can spot put those bulbs in. They can naturalize in that area. If it's completely shady, if it's like you have pine or something that is going to be there full time, then bulbs are not going to work for you. You can have some bulbs that are perennialized, bulbs that are shaded. There are some, but again, a little bit more expensive on that side. How can you deter animals from using the restroom in your yard? Ooh, excellent questions. I haven't found a very good way of keeping my neighbors' dogs from the front yard, other than the leash. And I don't think that neighbors really pay attention. A lot of times at night, they let their pets just do their business in the yard, and if they pick it up, that's fine. If they don't, then that's fine too. Again, fencing is probably the only way you can keep any animals from any areas, whether they will attack the plants by herbivory like deer or rabbits, or a pet that is going to try to trample through the plants if they're young plants. Depending on the size of the animal and where the plant is and how big the area is, certain things are just going to be higher and bigger and not allow the animal to have like a physical, it's like a physical barrier for the animal to move through. I've noticed that if the plant is getting larger and if it has like pokey leaves, that tends to keep the animals away from it. But honestly, they're going to find kind of like areas to move through. And if they're determined enough, if there's an interesting smell, they'll go after it. So I don't know if it's a good, talk to your neighbors and say, hey, I don't want your dog in my yard. But yeah, pokey leaves, I put in some small like metal edging on my beds, because our neighbor was playing with her young puppy, and the puppy was getting big and actually jumping in and chasing the ball into my front bed, and I started getting really annoyed with that. So as soon as the plants reached certain height, it covered the ground, and as soon as the dog could not see where the ball was, that's all it took. But yeah, my husband had to kind of restrain me from going and telling her that next time when the dog comes near my bed, it's going to be trouble. um, Phyllis, what is a good smartphone app for identifying plants? Another excellent question. And there are some really, really good apps. Maybe because I know more about plants, I don't use apps that identify plants. So I would say, try to find some that have been put by universities. I know that there was one by a botanical garden, I think Chicago Botanical Garden, or what, I'm trying to remember which one put a really, really good app for trees and shrubs for woody plants. It was a free app and you had to like scan the leaf. I have seen some other apps that were kind of like quick and dirty in my opinion. but they did an okay job with some of the more common plants that, we put a flower in there and it tells you what it is. I can't really tell you. I think it's like, what is this plant is one that I have kind of like quickly looked at, but they're probably even more now. So if any one of your friends can share some of those with you, I would say go for it. I just simply don't use enough to know that. Um, Peggy, our side yard gets a lot of water from the roof when it rains. What is the easy way to detour the water? I tell you what I did with mine, and that is I closed the gutters and I moved all of that water away from the foundations because we're getting a lot of problems. And plants were dying as well. And so once I completely moved that water away from the foundations and directed it, because our house is on a slope, that really made a big difference. But even with that kind of treatment, I really have to pay attention to where the water is coming, because a lot of times we get like these gushes and there's like a huge like storm surge and the backyard is like flooded, and that gutter is just simply not doing enough. So other than directing that water, grabbing it before it falls and then directing it, there really is no good way that you're going to stop that water and keeping those plants from getting flooded. So yeah, that's probably the only thing you could do in a major way. What plants eliminate mosquitoes? Ooh, I don't think that there are plants that will eliminate mosquitoes. Mosquitoes breed in water, standing water in particular. So emptying any kind of standing water in your landscape, patio, anywhere around your house is your best bet to minimize the mosquitoes around your house. And that is one thing that definitely has made a difference. We tend to not pay attention to how much standing water there is, but all you need is several days of that still ponding water and you're going to have some mosquito laying larvae there. There are certain plants that can be kept, like a lot of the mints and rosemaries and anything in the mint family, and plants with a lot of fragrance from the foliage is one thing that people have said deters mosquitoes. But again, cleaning any kind of standing water is your best bet to minimize mosquitoes. So good one there. I think I got pretty much all the questions.
Yeah, I think so. That's all the ones that I see. I do want to make a note, y'all. I have posted the link to our survey a couple of times, so please find that in the chat. I will also send that in the follow-up email. It's really important for us as agents to evaluate the programming we provide to y'all, and to just kind of show everybody what we're doing and learn from it and get more good programming for you. So great feedback. Thank you, Peggy. We're very glad y'all were on here, and Phyllis. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we love having Dr. Pennisi come speak. She's definitely one of our favorite speakers and most popular speakers. Oh, from Washington.
Wow, that's incredible.
Oh yeah, my Australia folks aren't on here this time, I don't think, but yeah, I have a group that comes in from Australia too. So shout out to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your positive feedback. And again, there is just a lot to do. And I have learned that the only way you learn is by doing it yourself and taking copious notes and photos and just talking with people about what's worked with them, and just think outside of the box. You don't have to buy plants. You can use what you have, and a new plant is certainly nice and great, but you can make sure you have a new look with just removing plants around, propagating some, exchanging plants with your neighbors. Think about that too. And that's just a easy way to get yourself a new look. So thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everyone that gave me feedback. I really appreciate being with you tonight. So thanks for sticking out, and have fun with your summer. We're certainly looking for a mask-free being outside, and I'm looking to hug Melissa. That's what I'm looking for next time.
I'm looking forward to that too. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.